They wheeled him into the visiting room in a chair he didn't need, and the second I saw his face, I forgot how to breathe. My brother, my other half, the one who came out of our mother 4 minutes ahead of me and spent the next 63 years acting like those 4 minutes made him the sturdy one. He had a split lip crusted over black, a cheekbone the color of a rotten plum, and he was holding his left arm against his ribs the way a man holds something that's already broken. He sat down across the little steel table, and he wouldn't look at me. That was the part that scared me most. In our whole lives, my brother had never once been unable to look me in the eye. Before I tell you the rest of it, and I'm going to tell you all of it, do me a favor. Let me know down in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I like knowing there's somebody out there. My name doesn't matter much anymore, but people used to call me Wade. My brother is Silas. We're identical twins, and I mean identical. Same gray in the same places, same crooked front tooth, same little dent in the chin our daddy had before us. Growing up, our own mother mixed us up until she started making me wear blue and him wear green. But somewhere along the way, our lives split down the middle like a log under an axe. Silas got the good road, married a sweet woman, raised a daughter, drove a delivery route for 30 years, went to church, never raised his voice. And me? I got the road with all the potholes. I've got something in me the doctors have a folder full of names for. Impulse control disorder, they wrote once. Intermittent explosive, another one said. I just call it feeling everything all the way to the bone. When I love so hard it aches. And when something wakes the other thing up in me, it doesn't whisper, it roars. That roar is how I ended up here, Larkspur State Hospital, 11 years and counting. I did those years for a reason that still doesn't feel wrong to me even now. When we were 17, 3 grown men cornered Silas behind a gas station because he wouldn't hand over the $12 in his pocket. By the time they pulled me off them, 2 had broken jaws and 1 lost the sight in an eye. The judge looked down at me and said I was a danger to society. Maybe he had a point, but nobody ever cornered my brother again. So there we were, all those years later, and he was the one showing up broken. I reached across that table and touched his hand, careful, like he was made of something that could shatter. Silas, I said, look at me. Who did this to you? He tried to smile. Even beat half to death, he tried to make it easy on me. You ought to see the wall I walked into, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. And then, because I have never in my life been able to lie to my own reflection, and he can't either, the truth came out of him in a low, ashamed mumble. It's Dennis, he said. Delia's husband. Delia, my niece, Silas's only child. The little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest before the state decided I couldn't be around little girls anymore. I hadn't seen her since she was a bride, glowing, marrying a smooth-talking man her daddy already had a bad feeling about. What do you mean, Dennis? I said, real slow. Dennis did this to you? Silas nodded, and the shame just poured off him. He hits her, Wade. He's been hitting her for years. I only found out how bad this past winter. And now he started raising his hand to the baby, too. To Noli, she's 3 years old. His good eye filled up. I went over there to make him stop. And Dennis, his mama, his sister, the 3 of them, put me on the floor and took turns. I couldn't. I'm not you, Wade. I've never been able to fight. I just curled up and let him. I don't remember standing, but I was standing. The plastic chair I'd been in was on its back on the floor, and an orderly was already moving toward me from the wall, and I made myself sit back down and put my hands flat on the cold steel and breathe, the way 11 years of group therapy taught me to breathe. In, hold, out. The roar was awake now, but for the first time in my life it wasn't wild. It was patient. It had a direction. I looked at my brother's face, and then I looked at it the way you look in a mirror when you're trying to figure something out. Same jaw. Same gray at the temples, same little dent in the chin. The only real difference between us anymore was that 11 years of push-ups on a barred window and pushing back against my own storm had made me hard in a way soft, gentle Silas had never had to become. Silas, I said quietly, nobody ever could tell us apart. Not Mama. Not our own wives, God rest 'em. He caught my meaning and the color drained right out of him. No, Wade, absolutely not. Those people are animals. I almost laughed. Brother, I said, I have been sleeping down the hall from animals for 11 years. The only difference is, these ones are behind a lock, and those ones out there are running loose in your grandbaby's house. I want to be honest with you here, because if I dress this up, I'm no better than the men who lie about how they got their bruises. What I did next was not smart, and it was not legal, and I'd be lying if I said I'm proud of the shape it took. But I'd be lying worse if I said I wouldn't do it again. We were two men who looked like one man, and one of us needed to be somewhere safe, and one of us needed to go stand in a doorway and take the hit. My whole life I'd been the wrong twin. For 1 week, being the wrong twin was going to be the most right thing I ever did. It's easier than you'd think when you're identical to become each other. Same face on the ID. I knew his birthday, his social, the name of the dog we buried when we were 9. I signed his release forms with a hand that shaped the letters just like his. I put on his soft flannel shirt that still smelled like fear and defeat, and he put on my gray hospital sweats, and I walked my brother down the hall to a bed by the window and told him to rest, to eat, to let somebody take care of him for once in his stubborn life. Then I walked out the front doors of Larkspur State Hospital into an afternoon that smelled like cut grass and free air, and I got on a city bus headed for the east side of town. The neighborhood got worse block by block, the way they do. Nice enough near the hospital, then tireless cars up on blocks, then a boarded-up church, then the street where my brother's daughter was raising my great-niece. The house was a low gray ranch, with a sofa rotting on the porch and a screen door hanging by one hinge. Somebody's mailbox had been beaten sideways with a bat. When I put the key in the lock, I could already smell it through the door. Cigarettes gone stale, dishes left too long, something sweet and sour underneath that turned my stomach. The living room was a war zone. Beer cans, a TV blaring a game show at nobody, a coffee table with a burn scar in the middle of it, and then in the corner, half hidden behind a laundry basket, I saw her, Noli, 3 years old and small for it, in a t-shirt, 3 sizes too big, dark hair matted, holding a stuffed rabbit that had lost one ear and most of its stuffing. She looked up at me with the eyes of somebody who had already learned that grown men are weather you have to survive. She pulled her knees in tight and pressed her back into the wall. "Grandpa," she whispered, "not happy. Braced. I have hurt people in my life. I've felt bones give under my hands. Nothing ever cracked me open like that one whispered word from a baby who thought her own grandpa was something to hide from." I got down on the floor, all the way down on my knees so I'd be small too, and I made my voice as soft as I had in me. "Hey there, little bird," I said. "You're all right. Grandpa's not going to let anything happen to you, Daddy." A thin voice came from the kitchen. "Is that you?" And then Delia came around the corner, and my heart went to pieces all over again. I remembered a laughing bride. What I saw was a shadow of a woman, too thin, gray under the eyes, wearing long sleeves in the middle of a hot afternoon. She moved the way beaten people move, shoulders rounded down, feet careful, ready to flinch. She had a dish towel twisted up in her hands like it was the only thing holding her together. When she saw it was just her father, some of the fear left her, and what came in behind it was worse. Relief. Relief that it was only her old daddy and not the other man. "Oh," she breathed, "it's you. How'd your appointment go, Dad?" I couldn't answer for a second. I just looked at my niece and my great-niece living like 2 mice in a house that belonged to a cat, and I understood exactly what my brother had walked into, and why gentle Silas had let them beat him into the floor rather than fight. Because if he'd fought, he'd have had to leave, and if he'd left, who would have been in this house? "Went fine, sweetheart," I finally managed. "Went just fine." I was still down on the floor with Noli when heavy feet came down the hall, and a voice like a rusted gate said, "Well, look what the tide dragged back." Doreen, Dennis's mother. She filled the hallway in a floral housecoat, gray hair scraped back so tight it pulled her mean little eyes into slits. She looked at me the way you look at a stain. "Where you been all day, huh? Sitting up at some doctor's office while my son's out breaking his back to keep a roof over your ungrateful heads?" She kicked a beer can across the room. "Look at this pigsty. No wonder my Dennis comes home with a headache." Behind her came a younger, harder copy of the same face, Roxanne, the sister, and trailing her, a chubby little boy of 5 with chocolate ringing his mouth and a strut he'd learned from every adult in that house. Tanner. He made a beeline for Noli, snatched the one-eared rabbit right out of her arms, and held it over his head. "This is stupid," he announced. "You're stupid. Babies play with stupid stuff." Then he shoved her, hard, and she went over onto her side on the dirty floor. "I've told you the roar in me is patient now. It is." But that little boy's foot came back to kick a 3-year-old who was already down, and patient or not, I was across that room before anybody drew a breath. My hand closed around his ankle in the air. Gentle, just enough. No, I said. Just the one word. The whole room stopped. Tanner's eyes went round. Doreen came charging with her hand up. Roxanne started hollering, and I stood up to my full height, still holding that little foot an inch off the ground, and I looked down at Doreen until she stopped short and had to tilt her head back to keep looking at me, and something in my face made her take one step back and then another. I set the boy down easy. In this house, I said, and I said it quiet, 'cause quiet lands harder. You don't take her things. You don't push her. You don't touch her. Not you, and not any grown person standing in this room either. That's the new rule. Starting right now. Roxanne grabbed her son and backed toward the hall. Doreen sputtered something about a freeloader, but the venom was gone out of it. They shuffled off down the hallway whispering, and a door shut and I heard the lock turn. Behind me, Delia was on her knees with Noli gathered up in her arms, staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Dad," she whispered, you never stand up to them." I knelt back down beside my niece and my great-niece. "Well," I said, "maybe it's about time somebody did. That first night I lay on that ruined couch under a blanket that smelled like an ashtray, and I did not sleep. I listened to the little sounds of Delia and Noli breathing in the back room, and I waited for the thing I knew was coming. Around 1 in the morning, a motorcycle came grinding down the street, backfired, and died in the yard with a crash of metal. Then the front door came open so hard it bounced off the wall. Dennis filled the doorway. Big man gone soft in the middle, work shirt, jeans, and a smell coming off him like a bar closing. His eyes were wet and mean and stupid with drink. "Delia," he bellowed, loud enough to wake the baby, and I heard Noli start to cry in the back. "Get out here. Get me something to drink." Then he saw me sitting up on the couch and his lip curled. "And what's this old fool doing on my couch? Get up, old man, my house, my rules. Rule 1, when I come home you make yourself disappear." I stood up slow. At my full height I was maybe an inch under him, but 11 years had made every inch of me count and none of his did. "This isn't your house," I said. "Delia pays the rent on it. You just live off it." His face went purple. "You talking back to me?" He came at me in that clumsy drunk stumble and swung a slap, wide and sloppy, the kind that works fine on a woman who's afraid or a child who can't run. I caught his wrist out of the air the way you catch a slow underhand toss. He gaped at his own hand. He threw the other one, and I caught that too, and then I just held him there, both arms trapped, weaving on his feet like a scarecrow in the wind. "Let me tell you the real rules," I said. "Rule 1, you never lay a hand on Delia again." I put pressure on the wrist, slow, and I felt it go. A clean, dry snap, like breaking a stick of kindling. His scream about took the roof off. "Rule 2, I went on, calm as church. You never touch that baby." And I put one short punch into the soft middle of him, just under the ribs where the air lives, and all the fight went out of him at once. He folded onto the floor and stayed there, whimpering, cradling that wrist. Down the hall I heard 2 women scrambling and whispering behind a locked door, too scared to come see. The next morning the police came, and I want you to hear how this part went, because it matters. 2 of them, an older one named Randall and a younger detective named Ruiz. Dennis had already called them, sitting there at the kitchen table with a dish towel splinted around his wrist, and the second they walked in, he pointed at me. "That old lunatic attacked me, broke my wrist for nothing. He's crazy, he needs to be locked up." Officer Randall looked at me. "Sir, your side of it?" I didn't say a word. I walked to the drawer where I'd found the night before exactly what I'd hoped my careful brother would have kept, and Silas had. Every ER printout, every discharge sheet, every photo Delia had taken of her own face in the bathroom mirror and been too ashamed to ever do anything with. 2 years of it. Broken ribs, a fractured orbital, bruises in the shape of a hand. I laid them out on that table one at a time. "These are my daughter's medical records," I said. "That's what he does. And these," I laid down the last 2, "are her father's, from last week, when 3 of them held him down and beat him for trying to protect a 3-year-old. Officer Randall picked up a photo of Delia's swollen shut eye, and his jaw went tight. Detective Ruiz flipped through the dates. 2 years of them, all with Delia's name, all in the same neat handwriting. He looked up at Dennis. "You're telling me this 63-year-old man walked in and attacked you for no reason? And these," he tapped the stack, "are what, exactly?" "She's clumsy," Dennis mumbled. "She falls. She fell down the stairs and broke her own ribs," Ruiz said flatly. 11 separate times. They didn't arrest anybody that morning. because Delia was still too frightened to file, and I understood why better than they did. But Detective Ruiz stood in that doorway on his way out and looked Dennis dead in the eye and said, "This is your one warning. We come back here, somebody's going to jail, and it isn't going to be him." And they left, and the house sat there in a silence, so thick you could have cut it, except for the low, frantic hiss of Doreen and Roxanne plotting in the back. That's the thing about people like that. Getting caught doesn't shame them. It just makes them think harder about how not to get caught next time. By supper time, the whole mood had gone strange and syrupy. Doreen came out of her room, practically humming. Set a bowl in front of me at the table. She'd never once offered my brother a plate in 7 years, Delia told me later, and stood there with her hands folded, watching me with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "Go on and eat now," she said. "Made it special. Put a little something extra in just for you." I lifted the spoon, I made a show of a sip, and then I let my elbow jump like I'd been startled by a noise at the window, and the whole bowl went over the edge and shattered on the floor. "Oh, shoot," I said. "Clumsy old me. I'm awful sorry, Doreen. Don't you dare go to the trouble of another bowl on my account. I'll just fix myself a piece of bread." Her face went through about 4 things in 2 seconds and landed on a smile so tight it looked painful. I got down and cleaned up her little something extra and didn't eat a bite of it. I told them I was worn out and turned in early on the couch. I made my breathing go slow and deep, the picture of an old man dead asleep, and a little after midnight the floorboard started to creak. Somebody coming careful down the hall. The steps stopped by the couch. Through my eyelashes, in the sliver of light from the hall, I saw Dennis standing over me with his good hand, the one that still worked, and in it a coil of clothesline rope. I let him get close. I let him reach for my shoulder, and then my hands came up and closed around his throat, and I sat up into him, and his eyes went wide and white with terror. "Going somewhere?" I whispered. He didn't last long. A man doesn't, when you've got both thumbs where they need to be, and 11 years of practice at not letting go. When he went limp, I carried him into the back bedroom and tied him to the iron bed frame with his own rope, snug at the wrists and ankles, and I worked a pillowcase into his mouth so all he could do was make sounds now. Here is the part I've thought about more than any other, because it's the part that turns my stomach and satisfies it in the same breath, and I've made my peace that both those things can be true. I slipped out the back door and around the side of the house to the little window of the room where Doreen and Roxanne slept. And I hauled off and started pounding on the siding, and I hollered in my brother's frightened, gentle voice. The voice they'd taught themselves wasn't worth listening to. "Help! Help me, please. He's got me. He's beating me. Somebody help. He's gonna kill me." I threw in the sounds of furniture going over. I made it good. Feet hit the floor inside. Not toward me. Away from me, toward the back bedroom, toward the sounds of a helpless old man tied down and struggling in the dark. Doreen came through that door first with a rolling pin up over her head and a look on her face I will never forget as long as I live, because it wasn't fear and it wasn't confusion. It was joy. She had been waiting for this. Roxanne came in right behind her, swinging a metal mop handle like a bat. The room was black except for the thin light behind them. On the bed they could just make out a big man's shape, tied down, thrashing, mumbling behind a gag. What they couldn't see was me crouched in the far corner with my phone up, the little red light recording. What they couldn't see was whose face was under the darkness. "This is for my Dennis's wrist," Doreen panted, and she brought that rolling pin down across the ribs of the man on the bed. The muffled scream that came back should have stopped her cold. It was too high, too wrong, but she was too far gone to hear it. Roxanne swung the mop handle down onto an arm that was already broken and splinted. And that's for shammin' this family in front of the police. They took turns. They worked up a sweat. "Harder, Mama," Roxanne said, and Doreen said, "Make him understand what happens to a man who crosses us." On and on, 3 minutes that felt like an hour, 2 women beating the shape in the dark with everything they had while I knelt in the corner and let the camera see all of it. Finally, Doreen stepped back, wiping her face. "I think he's learned it," she said, breathing hard. "You reckon we untie him?" "Not yet," Roxanne said. "Let him lay there and think about." I stood up and hit the light. They squinted into the sudden white. And when their eyes cleared, they were standing over their own Dennis, their son, their brother. His face a swollen ruin, his broken arm twisted, his chest heaving in little sips of air, tears running down over the gag. Doreen's rolling pin hit the floor. Roxanne's mouth came open and nothing came out of it. Evening, I said, and I held the phone up so the red light was pointed right at them. Say hi to the evidence? Oh my God, Doreen whispered, dropping to her knees beside the bed. Oh my God, what did we do? What you did, I said. Is beat a bound man half to death with weapons on camera, out loud saying exactly why. That's not a misunderstanding, Doreen. That's about a decade apiece. I called it in myself. When the patrol cars and the ambulance came screaming down that street and painted the whole block red and blue, it was Detective Ruiz who came through the door, and I handed him the phone before he could ask a single thing. He watched the whole clip standing right there in the wreckage of that living room, and I saw his face change from tired to something like awe. In 11 years, he said, I don't think I've seen a cleaner piece of tape. They read Doreen and Roxanne their rights and walked them out in cuffs, both of them crying, Doreen calling out to a son who couldn't answer. And the paramedics loaded Dennis up, worried about internal bleeding from wounds his own mother put on him. When the sirens faded, the house was just me and Delia and Noli, and one very lost 5-year-old boy standing in the middle of the floor. Tanner, his grandmother gone, his mother gone, his uncle in an ambulance, and the old man he'd been taught to torment suddenly the only grown-up left standing. His chin started to go. For all his strutting, he was a scared baby whose whole world had just come down. Am I in trouble too? He whispered. I got down on the floor with him, the same as I had with Noli. That depends, I said. You remember how you treated Noli? He nodded, ashamed. Well, here's how it's going to be. Your mama and your grandma made some real bad choices, and they're going to be gone a good while. So you're going to stay with us. And in our house, we've got a job for a boy your size. I looked over at Noli, peeking out from behind her mother's legs, still hugging that one-eared rabbit. Noli here is the queen of this house now, and you're going to be her knight. You know what a knight does? A knight shares. A knight never ever pushes or hits. A knight makes sure the queen gets the biggest slice and the softest chair. Think you can be that kind of knight, son? Tanner looked over at Noli for a long second. Then he nodded. Yeah, he said so quiet I barely heard it. I can do that. A week later, Dennis limped back through the front door with his arm in a sling and his ribs taped, and behind him came Doreen and Roxanne, out on bond, both of them looking like they'd aged 10 years in a county cell. I was sitting at the kitchen table coloring with Noli when they came in. The gang's all here, I said. Dennis wouldn't look at me. His own mother had put him in surgery. Nobody in that family could look at anybody. We're back, he mumbled. Charges got dropped soon as I said I wouldn't testify against my own mama. Real big of you, I said. But we've got some accounting to settle before anybody gets comfortable. I opened the folder I'd had ready. 7 years of Delia paying the rent while the 3 of you ate off her. 2 years of hospital bills that came from your fists. A lifetime of therapy that little girl's going to need to unlearn what she learned in this house. Call it $400,000. That's what this family is owed. Dennis started to laugh, and I set my phone on the table with the video queued up, the red-lit truth of it, and told them it was already copied to places they'd never find and never delete. You'll sell what you've got. You'll take the loans. I don't care how, but it gets paid. Or every soul in this town and every job you ever apply for sees exactly who you are. Then the door opened one more time, and my brother walked in. Silas, on his own 2 feet, his face healed, his eyes clear and bright the way they hadn't been in a year. He put his arm around his daughter. The doctors say I've made a remarkable recovery, he told the room, and he smiled. Amazing what a quiet week can do for a man. And I watched the Cross family, the Vance family, Dennis's people, look at him and look at me and look back at him, and I watched it dawn on them, slow and awful, what had actually walked into their house 7 days ago. Delia was already dressed in clean clothes with a little suitcase by the door. She stood up straight for maybe the first time in years, shoulders back, chin up, and she took my brother's arm and picked up her daughter, and she walked out of that house without one look back. We got the divorce filed that afternoon. We got the money, in the end, every dollar. And Noli got to be a little girl again. I stood in the doorway on my way out and looked at the 3 broken people at that kitchen table. For 7 years, I said, you did this because you figured we were weak, because nobody ever stood in your way. But here's the one thing you never understood about a family. You hurt one of us, you hurt all of us. And when you put your hands on our children, You go and wake up something you'd have been a lot better off letting sleep. I picked up Noli, and she wrapped both arms around my neck and held on like she'd never let go, and that was worth more than the 400,000 and the tape and all of it put together. Sometimes, I said, the ones you took for weak are just the ones who hadn't been given a reason yet. Now I need to talk to you plain for a minute, the way I'd want somebody talking to me. I'm back at Larkspur, in case you're wondering. Silas and I traded our lives back the same day, quiet, no fuss, and I'm serving out what I'm owed, and it's fine. But I don't want you walking away from this, thinking the old man is some kind of hero. I want you to hear the part that took me 11 years and 1 long week to finally learn. For most of my life, I thought the thing in me, the roar, the storm, whatever the doctors want to call it, I thought it was a curse. I spent years trying to build a cage strong enough to hold it, and that was wrong. You can't cage a thing like that. It only gets meaner in the dark. What you have to do is learn to point it. The good Lord didn't hand any of us our strength so we could hit back after the damage is done. He gave it to us so we could stand in a doorway before anybody ever gets through it. The lesson of my story is not that you've got to break a man's wrist to keep your family safe. Please, God, hear me. The lesson is that you rise and you speak long before it ever gets to a wrist. There's a story we old folks tell ourselves. I'm too old to matter, too tired. Somebody else's problem now. That's a comfortable lie, and it's still a lie. Age doesn't take your power. It sharpens it into something worse than power. It makes you wise, and wisdom is dangerous to anyone who preys on the ones who can't fight for themselves. And I want to say one more thing, because so many of you know exactly what I'm about to say before I say it. The hardest part of this whole story wasn't Dennis, and it wasn't his mother swinging that rolling pin in the dark. The hardest part was watching my own niece, beaten down for years, still ready to make his excuses, still saying she was clumsy, still wearing long sleeves in July so nobody would ask. If somebody you love is doing that right now, if you're doing that right now, I am begging you to notice the signs early, speak up sooner, ask for help before the pressure blows the roof off, because once a man is forced to cross the line I crossed, there is no walking back to who he used to be. Every family has a Silas, somebody gentle, somebody who'd rather curl up and take it than raise a hand. And every family needs somebody willing to stand in front of him and take the hit instead. Just be a wiser shield than I was. Find the way I couldn't find. I pray your story ends with a whole lot less pain than mine did. Maybe you look at me now and figure I'm just a violent old man who belongs where he is. That's easier, and I won't argue it. Doctors had their word for me. The judge had his. But before you turn it off, ask yourself just this one thing. What would you have done if the person you loved most in this world walked into a room broken, bruised, and too ashamed to look you in the eye? What name would you have earned that day? I don't tell you this to be forgiven. I tell it as a warning, because the world is real quick to call you the monster the moment you're forced to become the shield, and real slow to remember why you had to stand there in the first place. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. Tell me down below, when's a time somebody stood up for you, back when you couldn't stand up for yourself? I read every one of them. And if this story puts you in mind of the quiet protector in your own family, share it with somebody who needs to hear it tonight, and come sit with me again over at Voices of Uncle Walter.